"I've loved your sister for 8 years." Caleb said it in front of everyone, then smiled as if 6 years with Mireia meant nothing. The plus-size woman stared at her fiancé. "Then why did you ask me to marry you?" He shrugged. "Because she never wanted me." Mireia slapped him hard enough to silence the entire table, tore off her engagement ring, and threw it at his chest. A devastatingly handsome stranger slowly stood. Nobody warned her he was Darius Villano, the city's most feared mafia boss, or why he suddenly said, "Don't leave yet." Mireia did leave. She made it halfway down the restaurant's private corridor before Caleb caught up with her. "Mireia, wait." She kept walking. His footsteps quickened behind her. "Can you stop for 1 second? You're making this into something it doesn't need to be." That stopped her. Not the confession. Not even the humiliation. That sentence. She turned slowly. Caleb looked irritated rather than ashamed. His tie loosened, his face flushed from alcohol. Behind him, the dining room door remained partly open. Her family was still inside. So was Alyssa, who had gone pale when Caleb confessed his obsession with her. And somewhere beyond that doorway sat Darius Villano, silent and unreadable. Mireia looked at the man she had planned to marry, and suddenly remembered how many times she had heard some version of those same words. "You're overthinking it. You're too sensitive. You always assume the worst." 6 years of small corrections designed to make her distrust her own instincts. 8 years, she said. Caleb exhaled impatiently. "I was drunk." "You were drunk when you said it. Were you drunk for 8 years?" His jaw tightened. That was answer enough. Mireia felt something inside her collapse, but beneath the pain came a strange clarity. She remembered asking why he became distant whenever Alyssa visited. She remembered Caleb laughing and kissing her forehead, telling her jealousy wasn't attractive. Worse, he knew exactly where to wound her. After years of being the largest woman in rooms that treated thinness like admission, Mireia had confessed insecurities she rarely gave voice to. Caleb had turned them into weapons. Whenever she questioned him, somehow the conversation ended with Mireia wondering whether she was simply afraid a man like him would eventually want someone prettier, someone smaller, someone like Alyssa. "You knew," Mireia whispered. "Knew what?" "That I blamed myself." Caleb's expression shifted, only slightly, but she saw it. "You let me believe my body was the reason I didn't feel secure with you. Mireia, come on." "No." Her voice was quiet enough to make him stop. "You don't get to use my insecurities to hide your dishonesty anymore." Neither of them noticed that the dining room door had opened farther. Darius stood beyond it. He said nothing, but he heard every word. Caleb rubbed a hand over his face. "Fine. I handled things badly. But throwing away 6 years because I had feelings for someone else, you proposed to me, and I chose you." Mireia almost laughed. "No. Alyssa rejected you without even knowing she was doing it. I was what remained." For the first time, Caleb had no polished response ready. Then Alyssa appeared behind him. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "You destroyed the woman who loved you because you were obsessed with someone who never wanted you." Caleb turned. "Alyssa, this isn't—" "It is now." Mireia looked at her sister. There was no betrayal there, only horror. That mattered. Maybe tomorrow everything would hurt differently. Tonight, Mireia had only enough strength for one decision. She would not marry a man who had made her feel grateful for being tolerated. She walked away. Caleb called her name once more. Mireia never turned around. Darius watched her disappear through the restaurant doors, then glanced toward the small jewelry case she had forgotten beside her chair. Stamped beneath it was a tiny maker's mark, a crescent wrapped around a flame. For the first time that evening, Darius Villano's composure changed. He knew that mark. It was engraved on a box he had kept locked in his private safe for years. And suddenly, Mireia Dalton was no longer merely the woman whose engagement he had watched collapse. She was connected to the one person Darius had never been able to forget. His mother. 4 days after ending her engagement, Mireia was back at work. Not because she had recovered, because heartbreak did not cancel invoices. Her studio occupied a narrow storefront between a tailor and an old bookstore, its front window filled with pieces she had shaped, soldered, polished, and sometimes remade 3 times before they felt right. Here, at least, mistakes could be melted down and given another form. People were less cooperative. The bell above the door rang shortly after noon. Mireia looked up from her workbench and nearly dropped her pliers. Darius Villano stepped inside. He seemed too large for the little studio, not merely because of his height or broad shoulders. 2 men in dark suits remained outside, positioned with the quiet awareness of people who noticed every entrance, vehicle, and stranger on the sidewalk. Darius himself needed no visible weapon to feel dangerous. Mireia removed her protective glasses. "If Caleb sent you, I'm going to disappoint both of you." "He didn't." "Then this is either very good news or significantly worse news." Something almost shifted in Darius's expression. Almost. He approached the counter and placed a small velvet box between them. "I came because of this." Mireia opened it. Her humor disappeared. Inside lay an old silver pendant, shaped like an olive branch, surrounding a tiny blue stone. Age had softened its shine, but Mireia recognized the repair near the clasp. She had done it herself. Years ago. "I remember this." Darius watched her carefully. "You repaired it?" "There was a woman." Mireia lifted the pendant gently. Her studio had barely survived its first year then. She had needed every dollar, yet the elderly woman who brought in the necklace had counted the contents of her purse twice before quietly asking whether Mireia could hold the piece until she had enough money. Mireia had repaired it anyway. "She tried to pay me in installments," Mireia said. Darius's gaze dropped to the pendant. "What did you tell her?" Mireia frowned, searching the memory. "Something stupidly dramatic, probably. You told her to come back when it meant something to her." Silence settled between them. Mireia looked up. Darius's face remained controlled, but grief lived differently in controlled people. It appeared in the things they touched carefully. "She was my mother," he said. The words changed the room. Mireia slowly placed the pendant back inside its box. "I didn't know. That was the point." Darius explained that his mother had occasionally gone places without the Villano name, security, or the social machinery attached to being part of his family. She had wanted ordinary conversations with people who did not know what her son controlled. Mireia had been one of them. "She died 2 years later," he said. "I'm sorry." He acknowledged it with a slight inclination of his head. After her death, Darius had found the pendant inside its box. Beneath it was Mireia's tiny crescent and flame, maker's mark. He had never found the jeweler. Until the engagement dinner. "You recognized my logo?" "I recognize anything connected to her." Mireia studied him. The newspapers called Darius a billionaire industrialist. Caleb had spoken about securing his investment, as if gaining Villano's approval could transform his career overnight. The rumors surrounding Darius were darker. Men like him were supposed to offer favors that became debts. Mireia wanted neither. If you came to repay me, you don't owe me anything. I know. That answer surprised her. Darius closed the box. You were kind to her when her name meant nothing to you. His eyes met Mireia's. I don't forget things like that. For once, she had no sarcastic answer. He turned toward the door. Mireia blinked. That's it? For today. The bell rang as he stepped outside. Only then did Mireia notice the black sedan waiting at the curb, another vehicle behind it, and the subtle movement of his security team closing around him. Darius Villano had enough power to make powerful men careful, yet he had entered her tiny studio asking for nothing. Mireia looked down at the workbench, unsettled by a realization she could not explain. Caleb had spent 6 years making kindness feel like something she had to earn. The most feared man she had ever met had remembered one act of hers for nearly a decade. And Mireia had the strange feeling he was not finished remembering. Darius returned 2 days later. This time, Mireia was prepared. She had spent 48 hours imagining every possible reason a man like Darius Villano might come back. Gratitude. Money. An extravagant favor she would have to refuse politely. Perhaps even some attempt to intervene in the disaster Caleb had created. She had prepared answers for all of them. Darius ruined her preparation by placing a contract on her desk. Mireia stared at it. What's this? A proposal. That word and I aren't currently on speaking terms. For a second, Darius looked genuinely amused. Business, he clarified. Villano Industries funded a foundation established in his mother's name. Its next charitable collection would commemorate women who had rebuilt their lives after financial hardship, displacement, or loss. Darius wanted Mireia's studio to design a limited jewelry line inspired by his mother's pendant. Not a gift, not charity, a commission. Mireia opened the contract. Then she began reading. Darius waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. She checked licensing rights, production deadlines, ownership of original designs, payment schedules, cancellation clauses, and the language governing future reproductions. When Mireia reached the final page, she flipped back to page 3. Darius finally spoke. Most people sign faster. Most people probably have lawyers. I can provide one. She looked up. That would be your lawyer. A pause. Fair point. Mireia returned to the document. 20 minutes later, she circled 2 clauses. This one gives your company approval over modifications after delivery. Yes. No. Darius raised an eyebrow. If my name remains attached to the collection, nobody changes my designs without my approval. You're negotiating with me. I thought that was what contracts were for. Something in his gaze sharpened, not anger, but interest. And the second clause? The exclusivity period is too long. It protects the collection. It also prevents my studio from taking certain commissions for 18 months. Make it 6, 12, 8, 10. Mireia leaned back. 9, and I won't charge you extra for making a billionaire negotiate in a room that smells like solder. Darius stared at her. Then he reached for a pen. 9. Only after the revisions were made did Mireia sign. Darius glanced at the pages. You really do read everything. I just spent 6 years trusting the wrong man. She capped her pen. I'm reading everything now. The humor left his face. He did not tell her she was being cynical. He did not suggest Caleb had merely made a mistake. He simply nodded. Good. That single word unsettled her more than sympathy would have. Their first design meeting took place 3 days later at Villano Industries headquarters. Mireia had expected wealth. She had not expected power to be so quiet. The lobby occupied several stories of stone, glass, and restrained luxury. Security recognized Darius before he reached a checkpoint. Executives waiting near an elevator lowered their voices when he passed. Nobody rushed toward him. Nobody needed to. His authority seemed built into the building. During the meeting, however, Darius never used it against her. When Mireia rejected an expensive gemstone because it overwhelmed the design, the creative director looked toward Darius. Darius looked at Mireia. "Her collection," he said. That ended the discussion. Over the following weeks, meetings became routine. Mireia learned that Darius drank espresso without sugar, hated unnecessary presentations, and could silence a room merely by becoming quieter. Darius learned that Mireia sketched when thinking, argued with gemstones as though they had personalities, and used dry humor whenever she was uncomfortable. Neither called what was developing between them attraction. Not yet. It was easier to call it work. Then one evening, Mireia arrived at headquarters carrying revised sketches and found Darius alone beside the conference room windows, her designs spread across the table. He was studying one particular piece, the pendant-inspired centerpiece. "You don't like it?" she asked. Darius looked at her. "My mother would have." The answer was so unguarded that Mireia stopped. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Darius carefully returned the sketch to the table, and Mireia understood something she had not expected. He had not hired her because he pitied the woman Caleb discarded. He had trusted her with a memory. That was far more dangerous, because somewhere between contracts, arguments, and quiet meetings, Mireia had begun trusting him with small pieces of herself in return. Caleb waited until Mireia was alone. It was nearly closing time when the bell above her studio door rang. Mireia looked up from a tray of unfinished silver pieces and felt her entire body go still. Caleb stood inside, wearing the navy suit she had once helped him choose. For 6 years, that face had meant home. Now it meant exhaustion. "You need to leave. I just want 5 minutes. No, Mireia." There it was, that soft, patient tone he used whenever he wanted her refusal to sound unreasonable. She set down her tools. "What do you want?" Caleb took her question as permission and stepped closer. "I've had time to think." "Congratulations." His mouth tightened. "I was confused that night." "You were remarkably specific for a confused man." "I said terrible things, I know that." He moved toward the counter. "But what happened with Alyssa was complicated." "No, it wasn't. You loved someone who didn't love you. Then you used her sister as a substitute." "That isn't fair." Mireia almost admired the audacity. For years, Caleb had possessed an extraordinary ability to hurt her, and then make her defend the legitimacy of being hurt. She no longer felt obligated to participate. "Then why are you here?" Caleb hesitated. "I think we threw away something good." "We?" "I know I made mistakes, but you and I worked. You understood my schedule. You supported what I was building. My family loves you. Your family." Mireia stared at him. And suddenly she understood. Caleb was not describing love. He was listing services. She had steadied him before presentations, entertained investors' wives, remembered his mother's birthday, redesigned her own schedule around his meetings, and spent years making his ambitions feel like their shared future. He missed infrastructure, not Mireia. Then his eyes moved toward the presentation boards behind her. The Vellano Foundation logo was printed across the top. His expression changed, only for a second, but Mireia saw it. "You're working directly with Vellano now?" There it was, the real reason. Caleb's largest development project had stalled while he searched for institutional backing. For months before their engagement dinner, he had talked obsessively about Vellano Industries as the investor capable of making him untouchable in the city's property market. Mireia folded her arms. Why does that matter? It doesn't. Caleb, he exhaled. I'm trying to fix us. There is no us. You don't mean that. I returned your ring. You were emotional. Mireia laughed, not bitterly. Actually laughed. Caleb's face hardened. What? You confessed to loving my sister at our engagement dinner, called me the woman who was available, and somehow you're still explaining my own decisions to me. His composure cracked. And what exactly are you doing with Darius Vellano? Working. That's all? Mireia's amusement disappeared. Caleb stepped closer. People are talking. People usually do. You're embarrassing me by running around with another man. For 1 second, Mireia simply stared. Then the absurdity overwhelmed her. She laughed again. You admitted loving my sister at our engagement dinner. Caleb flushed. I think embarrassment survived without my help. A quiet sound came from the doorway. Caleb turned. Darius stood just inside the studio. He wore a charcoal suit, one hand resting loosely at his side. Through the front window, Mireia could see one of his security men waiting beside a black sedan. Darius had clearly heard enough. Caleb straightened immediately. Mr. Vellano. The transformation was almost insulting. His anger vanished beneath professional charm. Darius looked at him without answering. Caleb adjusted his jacket. Actually, I'm glad you're here. I've been hoping we could discuss the Wren Harbor development. My office submitted— No. One word. Caleb blinked. You haven't heard the proposal. I have. And Darius's expression remained perfectly calm. I wasn't interested. Mireia noticed the past tense, but said nothing. Caleb did. Wasn't? Darius glanced toward her. Caleb followed his gaze, and for the first time, Mireia saw fear beneath her former fiancé's confidence. Not fear that Darius would hurt him. Fear that the woman Caleb had considered safely beneath his control now stood somewhere he could no longer reach. Mireia walked to the door and opened it. This conversation is over. Caleb looked at her, then at Darius. He seemed to expect one of them to negotiate. Neither did. Finally, he stepped outside. Mireia closed the door behind him. When she turned around, Darius was watching her. What? She asked. The corner of his mouth moved. Nothing. You're smiling. Barely. Still counts. Darius removed his coat and placed it over a chair. I came to discuss the final prototypes. Mireia picked up her pencil. Then try not to look so entertained. This time he did smile, and Mireia hated how much she liked being the reason. Adrian Cole brought coffee on a Tuesday. That should not have mattered. Adrian had been Mireia's client for nearly 3 years, an architect who commissioned custom pieces whenever one of his projects reached a milestone. He was handsome, successful, irritatingly punctual, and one of the few men who could spend 20 minutes discussing metal finishes without pretending expertise he did not possess. He was also newly single. Mireia learned that when he placed 2 coffees on her workbench and said, "Before you ask, the second one isn't payment." I wasn't going to ask. You looked suspicious. I recently cancelled a wedding. Suspicion is my new hobby. Adrian laughed. He asked whether she wanted dinner sometime. Mireia surprised herself by saying yes, not because she was desperate to date. She wasn't. But saying yes felt different from the choices she had made with Caleb. There was no calculation about whether she was desirable enough, no gratitude that an attractive man had noticed her. She simply wanted dinner. So she accepted. Unfortunately, Darius arrived 3 minutes later. His gaze moved from Adrian to Mireia, then to the extra coffee. Adrian extended a hand. Adrian Cole. I know. Of course he did. Darius shook it once. Mireia watched the two men with growing amusement. Adrian eventually left, promising to text her about Friday. The door closed. Silence. Darius stared at the coffee. Mireia waited. He continued staring. Do you have a problem? No. You've been staring at his coffee for 30 seconds. Bad coffee irritates me. You haven't tasted it. I can tell. Mireia leaned against the counter. For a man who controlled corporations, security networks, luxury developments, and an organization people only discussed carefully behind closed doors, Darius Villano was remarkably bad at pretending not to be jealous. Adrian asked me to dinner. I assumed as much. And? And what? Nothing. Darius opened the portfolio he had brought. Mireia smiled. Over the next 2 weeks, Adrian appeared often enough to become a quiet disturbance in Darius's otherwise disciplined existence. Flowers arrived once. Darius regarded them as though they had violated a zoning ordinance. When Adrian called during a design meeting, Darius became intensely interested in a spreadsheet he had already reviewed. Mireia enjoyed it far more than she should have. But beneath the comedy was something she needed to understand. Darius was accustomed to control. People waited for his decisions. Executives reorganized schedules around him. Men with political connections measured their words before disagreeing. Mireia would not become another territory inside his empire. One evening, after Adrian invited her to a gallery opening, she caught Darius watching her from across the studio. Would you like me to stop seeing him? His answer came too quickly. That would be convenient. For whom? Silence. Mireia lifted an eyebrow. Exactly. Darius closed the distance between them, stopping on the opposite side of her workbench. I don't like him. You barely know him. I know enough. That's not an argument. No. The admission surprised her. Darius looked down at her hands, where silver dust still clung to her fingers. I am accustomed to removing complications. Mireia's humor faded. Adrian isn't a complication. He's a person. I know. And I'm not something you're competing to acquire. His eyes returned to hers. I know that too. She believed him. That was what made the moment dangerous. Caleb would have turned the conversation around. He would have called her defensive, accused her of misunderstanding, then punished her with distance until she apologized. Darius simply stood there and accepted a boundary he did not enjoy. Mireia softened. Then what exactly bothers you? For perhaps the first time since she had met him, Darius Villano looked like a man facing a problem his influence could not solve. He gets to ask you for things I have no right to ask for. Her breath caught. Darius continued before she could respond, and I dislike discovering that this bothers me. Mireia's smile returned slowly. That sounds difficult. It is. Should I feel sorry for you? No. Good. She returned to her sketch. Darius remained beside the table. After a moment, Mireia glanced up. You know, normal men occasionally ask women on dates. I've heard rumors. She laughed. Darius's expression softened at the sound. But he did not ask. Not that night. And strangely, Mireia respected him more for it, because Darius was beginning to understand something Caleb never had. Wanting her did not create a claim on her. If he wanted Mireia Dalton to choose him, then even the most feared man in the city would have to do the one thing power could not accomplish for him. He would have to give her the freedom to choose someone else. Caleb's project began collapsing quietly. The Wren Harbour development had looked impressive in presentations: luxury residences, retail space, private offices, and a waterfront hotel packaged as the project that would make Caleb one of the city's serious developers. What Caleb had failed to advertise was how much of it depended on other people saying yes. One of those approvals belonged to a financing and infrastructure subsidiary controlled by Villano Industries. Mireia discovered that when Caleb appeared at her studio again, this time he did not pretend he wanted her back. "I need you to talk to Villano." Mireia did not look up from the bracelet she was polishing. "No, you haven't even heard what I need." "That's because the answer arrived before the explanation." Caleb stepped closer to her workbench. "My development is being held up." "Sounds like something to discuss with your development team. Villano's subsidiary rejected our financing package." Mireia finally looked at him. "And you think I control Darius?" "I think he'll listen to you." The assumption made her stomach tighten. For weeks, she had worked to separate what she was building from the man she was slowly becoming attached to. The foundation collection carried her name because she had earned the contract. Her growing list of clients existed because people wanted her designs. Caleb still saw her as leverage. Only the powerful man beside her had changed. "No." His expression hardened. "Mireia, one conversation could save 18 months of work. Then you should have submitted a project worth approving." "You don't know anything about the deal." "Exactly, which is why I'm not interfering with it." Caleb laughed without humor. "So that's how this works now?" She set down the polishing cloth. "How what works? You stand next to Darius Villano, and suddenly you're too important to answer anyone." Mireia's eyes narrowed. "No, I finally learned that answering you isn't an obligation." Caleb's face reddened. "You think people don't know what you're doing? Designing jewelry? You know what I mean." He leaned closer. "You lose your fiancé, and within weeks you're running around with a mafia boss who can destroy my project. You expect me to believe that's coincidence?" Mireia became very still. Caleb mistook her silence for weakness. He always had. "So what is it?" he continued. "Revenge? Or are you sleeping with him to get it?" Once she would have slapped him. The thought flashed through her body, almost like muscle memory, then disappeared. Mireia walked calmly to the front door and opened it. "Get out!" Caleb stared at her. "That's it?" "Yes. Or what?" "Or I call the police." A movement behind him made Caleb turn. Darius stood near the entrance to the back workspace. He had arrived minutes earlier for a final review of the foundation collection. Mireia had been so focused on Caleb that she had not heard him enter through the rear door. Darius's expression was unreadable. That was worse than anger. Caleb stepped back. For a moment, Mireia could almost see the calculations moving behind his eyes. Darius controlled enough legitimate business interests to close doors Caleb desperately needed open. And beyond those companies lay the other Villano empire, the one built on loyalty, private security, underground influence, and consequences men like Caleb preferred not to test. Darius could have threatened him. He could have ended the confrontation with a phone call. Instead, he looked at the open door Mireia was holding, then at Caleb. "She answered you. Nothing more." Caleb swallowed. "This is between Mireia and me." "No," Mireia said. "It isn't." She held the door wider. Caleb looked at her one final time, perhaps waiting for the woman who had spent 6 years smoothing over his problems to reappear. She didn't. He left. Mireia locked the door behind him. For several seconds the studio was silent. Then Darius spoke. "You could have called me." Mireia turned. "I didn't need to." I know. No wounded pride, no insistence that protecting her was his right, just acknowledgement. That mattered more than Mireia wanted it to. What happens to his project? She asked. Nothing that wasn't already happening. She studied him. You didn't reject it because of me? No. Darius removed a folder from beneath his arm and placed it on her workbench. His numbers were weak. His disclosures were incomplete. The risk committee rejected the financing before anyone knew you and I were working together. Mireia released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Darius noticed. I won't use my companies to settle your personal history. And the other part of your empire? His gaze held hers. A dangerous question, a truthful answer. Not unless your safety requires it. Mireia nodded slowly. There was immense power standing in her studio. But for the first time in years, the thing that made her feel safest was not what a man was willing to do for her. It was what he was willing not to do. The Foundation collection sold out in 11 days. Mireia had prepared herself for respectable numbers, perhaps enough attention to bring several new clients into the studio. Instead, orders arrived faster than she could process them. A design publication featured the collection. 2 luxury retailers contacted her about partnerships. A private client commissioned an anniversary piece worth more than Mireia had earned during some of her earliest months in business. For the first time, expansion stopped being a fantasy. She signed a lease on the neighboring storefront, with her own money. When Darius arrived and found her standing amid paint samples, construction plans, and unopened boxes, he surveyed the chaos. You expanded. I did. You didn't tell me. You're not on the lease. His eyes narrowed slightly. Mireia smiled. Then Darius noticed the bottle of inexpensive champagne on her desk. Absolutely not. She stared at him. Excuse me. If we're celebrating, I'm replacing that. You're becoming controlling again. This is different. How? That champagne is an offense against civilization. Mireia laughed. Months earlier, his disapproval might have made her defensive. Now she understood the difference between Darius having an opinion and Darius believing his opinion was an order. He had learned the difference too. That evening, after the contractors left, they sat in the unfinished extension of her studio, with takeout containers between them. No security men stood inside. No executives waited for Darius. For once, he was simply a man sitting beside a woman he had spent months finding increasingly unnecessary reasons to visit. Mireia knew it. You don't need to personally review the Foundation inventory anymore. I know. The contract manager sends reports. Yes. And last Tuesday you came here because you supposedly needed clarification about a clasp. It was an important clasp. It was already approved. Darius looked at her. Mireia folded her arms. So why do you keep coming back? Silence. Darius could negotiate acquisitions involving hundreds of millions without hesitation. This answer took him longer. The first time, he said, I came because of my mother. Mireia's teasing expression softened. I know. I saw your mark on that jewelry case at the dinner. For years I had wondered who repaired her pendant. His gaze dropped briefly to Mireia's hands. She spoke about you once. Mireia blinked. What did she say? That a young jeweler treated her as though she mattered before knowing who she was. Mireia swallowed. I barely remember what we talked about. She remembered. Darius was quiet for a moment. So did I. Mireia looked around the unfinished studio, suddenly unable to hide behind humor. And now? His eyes returned to hers. Now I keep inventing reasons to come back. A smile escaped her. That's pathetic for a mafia boss. It's been a difficult adjustment. She laughed softly. Darius did not. Not this time. Mireia? Something in his voice changed the air between them. He moved closer, but stopped before touching her. That detail mattered. Darius could command rooms without raising his voice. He could move money, companies, security teams, and men whose loyalty was built on things Mireia deliberately did not ask about. But here, with her, he waited. Caleb chose you because someone else wouldn't choose him. The old wound tightened. Darius saw it. He continued carefully. He made his failure to recognize your value feel like evidence that you had less of it. Mireia looked down. For years she had measured herself against women, Caleb noticed. Smaller bodies, different faces. Alyssa. Even after leaving him, some part of her had still carried the humiliating question of why she had not been enough. Darius reached toward her, then paused. Mireia closed the distance herself, placing her hand in his. Only then did his fingers curl around hers. I'm choosing you because there isn't anyone else I want. Mireia's breath caught. Months ago, those words might have been enough. She might have mistaken being intensely wanted for being safe. She knew better now, so she did not answer immediately. Darius did not demand one. He did not remind her what he could offer. He did not ask whether Adrian was still around. He simply waited. Mireia studied the man people feared refusing. What if I need time? Take it. What if the answer isn't the one you want? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then it isn't. She searched his face. You'd really accept that? No. Mireia raised an eyebrow. Darius added, I would hate it privately and behave appropriately. Her laugh broke the tension. That might be the most emotionally healthy threat you've ever made. I've been practicing. Mireia stepped closer. Adrian had remained her friend after she told him honestly that her feelings were moving somewhere else. Caleb had taught her what it felt like to cling to a relationship because losing it seemed worse than being diminished inside it. Darius was teaching her something different. He could want without demanding, protect without replacing her judgment, wait without punishing her for making him wait. Mireia lifted her free hand to his face. This isn't revenge against Caleb. I wouldn't want it if it were. And I'm not interested in becoming some beautiful object in your empire. You've argued with me too much for that to be possible. She smiled. Then Mireia kissed him, slowly, because she chose to. Darius did not pull her closer until she did first. Outside, the city still knew Darius Villano as a man whose decisions rarely required anyone's permission. Inside Mireia's unfinished studio, he discovered that the answer he wanted most in his life meant nothing unless it was freely given. And Mireia discovered something too. Being chosen first felt good. Choosing for herself felt better. 1 year later, Mireia stood before a mirror, wearing a wedding dress that had never been designed to make her look smaller. It followed her curves instead. Soft ivory fabric framed the body she had once allowed Caleb to turn into evidence against her. Nothing had been hidden. Nothing needed correcting. Behind her, Alyssa adjusted the veil. You're staring. I'm thinking. That sounds dangerous on your wedding day. Mireia smiled at her sister through the mirror. A year had changed more than her relationship status. The expanded studio now employed 4 people. Her designs were carried by 2 luxury retailers, and another collection was scheduled for autumn. Darius had offered advice when she asked, introductions when she wanted them. Money, never. Mireia had built the next version of her life herself. Adrian remained a client, and, eventually, a genuine friend. Caleb did not remain anything. Wren Harbor collapsed after auditors and lenders uncovered financial discrepancies, inflated projections, and disclosures his company should have made months earlier. Darius never touched it. Caleb had destroyed his own future without anyone's help. Mireia found that strangely satisfying. Alyssa squeezed her shoulder. "Ready?" Mireia breathed out. "Yes." Darius waited outside the ceremony room. Even on his wedding day, security blended discreetly into the property. Men who controlled businesses, unions, contracts, and less respectable corners of the city had arrived early rather than risk keeping him waiting. Yet when Mireia approached, Darius seemed interested in none of them. Only her. His gaze traveled over her slowly, admiration unmistakable but never reducing her to the body inside the dress. Mireia smiled. "You know what's funny? Usually when you say that, I become concerned. The worst engagement of my life introduced me to my husband." Darius's expression cooled immediately. "I prefer not to thank Caleb for anything." She laughed. Then he looked at her more carefully. "Still nervous?" Mireia nodded. Darius held out his hand, but didn't take hers. "Want to leave?" A year earlier, Mireia might have thought love was proven by a man refusing to let her go. Now she understood better. Love was also the door remaining open, the choice remaining hers. She placed her hand in his. Not this time. Darius's fingers closed around hers. Then the man an entire city had learned to fear walked toward his wedding beside a woman who no longer needed anyone's choice to prove her worth. Mireia had once believed being loved meant being selected over someone else. She knew differently now. Darius had chosen her first, but before she could truly choose him, Mireia had finally learned to choose herself.